the Saint of the Week is today. And so it's a man who was born in England, William Grant Broughton, and his feast day is actually tomorrow. He died on the 20th of February at the age of 65. And he was the first and only bishop of Australia and the Church of England. So that's his claim to fame. So William Grant Broughton. He was born in London in 1788, so toward the end of the 18th century. It took a long time for him to enter his chosen profession. I think he was about 30 when he did that, because he needed to care for his widowed mother. And so his education took a while getting started, but finally he entered the church and was ordained deacon around the age of 30, as I said. He was married. He got married in the same year as he was ordained deacon, married a lady called Sarah. They had 2 daughters and also a son, but he died in infancy. And his main curacy was in a country curacy in Surrey. And he was there 10 years, and while he was there he did a lot of research. So he's a very learned man, and he published quite a lot of things, studies on Elsevier Greek Testament, and on Bishop Gowden's authorship of the icon Basilique. So I haven't looked those up and I don't know what they are, but they were inspired works of scholarship by all accounts. And it's writing those that gave him prominence and came to the notice of people. And so that's what started his career off, really, and his progression toward being bishop. So he was noticed by the Bishop of Winchester and also by the Duke and Duchess of Wellington. And so through the Duke he secured the chaplaincy for the Tower of London, which apparently was quite a prestigious appointment. And then he was nominated as Archdeacon of New South Wales. So that's how he came to be in Australia. And he didn't really see that as terribly important. He thought he wasn't going to be in Australia very long, but it turned out he was here for the rest of his life. Broughton showed common sense, political conservatism and sound churchmanship. And he was also welcomed into Australia. He was a little bit more popular than his predecessor, and so that got him off to a reasonable start. At that time, it was interesting because the church was very much the national church. So the government, it was almost part of the government, really. So the way it's expressed here is very good. It says here, the church would have a paternal concern for convicts, Aboriginals and settlers in the new areas, and a special responsibility for the organisation and control of education with the financial and official backing of the state. For it was above all the national church established in law, charged with the care of all subjects of the Crown, apostolic in its doctrine and government. So there was the church had a lot of power at the time. I'm going to skip a lot of this. I've got about 9 or 10 pages here, and I've tried to just select the pertinent points. Broughton was really concerned about education, but what he wanted was for the schools to be just Anglican, and he didn't want any other denominations involved in education, and so and he wanted it for the sort of middle to upper class people, sons of people in high places and that sort of thing. So that wasn't popular, as you can imagine, but with everybody. And then the governor at the time disliked that approach. So they were at loggerheads. The governor at the time was Governor Burke, and he didn't like religious exclusiveness. And so that set Broughton up, you know, in conflict with Governor Burke, and that went on for a long time. Eventually, he was prepared to admit toleration, but not religious equality, so he stuck to his guns for a long time. He then went back to England for a little while to try and get more support from the British government for more clergy and to establish more churches in Australia. So he worked jolly hard, and he did a lot of travelling around as well. And through that he developed a good relationship with the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, and they were actually very supportive and helped him to build churches in Australia. And then it was after that time that he became the first and only Bishop of Australia and the Church of England. So that was, he was approaching 50 years old at that stage. I think he was about 48. And so he was ordained bishop at Lambeth Palace, returned to Australia as the bishop. Things started to change in the government, so he found himself excluded from the legislative and executive councils, and he'd been used to being part of those. And so then the governor would have more control over things. So lots of battles with the governments of the day for another 13 years or so before a compromise regarding religious education in schools was reached. Broughton's main concern was to provide the colonies under his jurisdiction with the spiritual institutions of England. So that was always his aim. While he agreed that the colonial church had a missionary duty and the necessity to promote its physical expansion, he considered that its chief task was to sanctify and uphold the social structure. And this required not undisciplined evangelists, but men of temperate and professional ardour. So that was where he was coming from at the time. And so then that also then set him up at loggerheads with the laity. So, and this all sort of happened in Sydney and New South Wales, and you can sort of see where Sydney today has a different approach to the relationship between the clergy and the laity. The lines are more blurred, and so really I think it started with Broughton, and not saying it was that he caused it, but you can see the history of where it began there, and I suspect that's why it's continued to this day there. As a bishop, of course, he needed a cathedral. He began to build his cathedral in 1836, but he never saw it finished. So it took a long time. And then he actually established a whole lot of other bishoprics, so that he wouldn't be the only bishop. And so he established dioceses in Australia for the first time. So he was instrumental in that. So he established them in New Zealand, Tasmania, Port Phillip, Melbourne, Adelaide, and Newcastle. So he was a very hard-working chap. And but the battles continued. He decided to go back to England in 1852 to try and sort things out. And on his way, he contracted yellow fever. And so by the time he reached England, he was incredibly sick, and he died shortly thereafter. And so he didn't really have time to achieve the things that he was determined to achieve there. But he's certainly well remembered for his lasting legacy, and he was, and I can understand why he was protective. What he saw as in the Church of England ways, the Anglican ways, and didn't want those lost. And so that's our Saint of the Week.